time. So let's get started with today. I'm going to share my screen. All right, week 3 is biomolecules and cell chemistry. This is kind of an offshoot this week. There's no real lecture to follow along in your lab manual, so this is strictly going to be on the PowerPoint. So today's schedule is we're going to go over the Ecosphere project. If you have any questions or comments on that, we're going to get them here in a second. Then I'm going to lecture on calories, biomolecules, and pH, and then go through some of the assignments that are due next week. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the Ecosphere project? Anything that confused you on how to do it? What's upcoming for the future? Anyone got anything? We're all good, 100% good on the Ecosphere project. All right, cool. Just remember the Ecosphere setup is due today, as well as your data sheet should be due before class. Always everything assignment is due before 11 a.m. on class day. So remember, you are trying to create a self-sustaining ecosystem, an underwater ecosystem, which means that you can't just place a terrestrial plant in water and have it work. I saw some people send me their Ecosphere setups and they just took like grasses or weeds. And you can't really just have that in. Looks like we got a chat in here. Can we still turn it in with full credit? Yeah, you guys can turn it in today. Just make sure it's due by 5 p.m. today. So if you don't have it in, data sheet in a Word doc. So for this week, you're supposed to take data on it. And then right now, in the meantime, there's nothing else due for the Ecosphere until I think week 5, when we are doing your second Ecosphere, which I'll go into a little bit. But there is a few things in your lab manual that you do need to note on a weekly basis, which is just on page, where is it here? On page 19. You just want to note the water turbidity, which is like how cloudy or the water is, and then like the percent cloudiness, as well as any changes in the number of plants or animals, and then any other observations. On the bottom of page 19, it says daily, weekly data. This isn't something you turn into me, but you should definitely note because it will be helpful for when you write your progress report coming up. You're supposed to send, another question is, are we supposed to send it as a picture of our data today as well, or just a selfie? Data as a Word doc and a picture of it is due today. Both of those things are due today. All right. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so like I was saying, you can't, remember this is an underwater aquatic ecosystem, so you can't just take plants from the grasses where you find it, stick them in water, they will die. So please try to get plants from the water source that you are collecting your water from. And then you want to monitor your Ecosphere and start thinking of ways to manipulate it for when you create your second one. This one was kind of like a practice one to see if you can keep it alive. So monitor it, take the data, and then come time we need to make the second one, you're going to be able to manipulate one thing in it. So make sure you're continuing to make those observations. All right. Any other questions before we move on? Cool. Let's get back to it. So now I'm going to get into calories and biomolecules. So what are calories? Calories are just a unit to measure energy. In the US, a calorie is equal to a kilocalorie or 1,000 calories, a calorie with a capital C. You know all about calories because they're on nutrition labels, and it's really just the amount of energy required to raise one temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So it's a measure of energy, pretty much is what a calorie is. As well as on nutrition labels, you'll see 3 of the 4 macromolecules. You'll see carbohydrates, you'll see protein, and you'll see fats, which is pretty much like lipids. The one thing you won't see is nucleotides, which is considered a biomolecule, but it's not really a nutrition biomolecule, which I'll go into in a little bit here. So these are the four. You got proteins, which are made up of amino acids, and the biological function is used in enzymes, hormones, and structure as well. So keratin in your hair and your fingernails is made up of proteins. You got carbohydrates, which is the main source of energy in the form of starch for plants and sugars for animal cells. And you have lipids, which are fats. Again, energy storage in animals. They help insulate neurons, so keep your neurons firing. They're helpful in that. And then they create a phospholipid bilayer around your cell. And I'll go into all of this in detail in just a second. And then you've got these nucleic acids in the form of DNA and RNA. DNA is an information storage system, and then RNA is an information transfer between cells. So first off, you got protein, which is about 10 to 20% of an organism. It's made up of many amino acid monomers. So monomer is just one amino acid to form polymers. So on the slide here, you see that there are 21 amino acids. Each amino acid forms and organizes in a certain way to code for a certain protein. So you may have 3 or 4 different amino acids to form your polymer that codes for a certain protein in the body. Depending on the protein that it codes for, you have different biological functions. So proteins can be in the form of enzymes, which are used to accelerate chemical reactions. They work as a catalyst. You also got hormones and pheromones, which are cell signaling. Ways the cells communicate is also a form of proteins. And like I mentioned, you have keratin, which is a structural component of the body, which is also a protein, like your hair and fingernails. They're synthesized, they're created in the ribosomes, within the animal cell. And if you ever cooked an egg, you'll see that heat actually denatures proteins. So when you're frying an egg, the clear portion, which is the albumin, turns white. And that's actually you're denaturing those proteins, all right? And then you've got 4 calories of energy per gram of protein. That's the energy ratio that you'll get out of proteins. Any question on proteins? Cool. These are a few different examples of what proteins can do, the biological functions. So you've got digestive enzymes in the form of amylase and lipase. You've got hemoglobin as a protein, which is a transportation, carries stuff in the blood. You've got structure, hormone signaling, defenses, antibodies. They're all protect from foreign pathogens. Those are all proteins that are found in your body. Next up, we have carbohydrates, which is 2 to 3% of an animal cell. You can have 1, which is a monosaccharide, 2, a disaccharide, or 3 or more is poly or many polysaccharides. This is just how sugars are arranged in the body. So you've got a monosaccharide, which is just a simple sugar. It's just one sugar in the form of glucose, fructose, or galactase. We learned about glucose last week, which is the product of photosynthesis. That is a simple sugar. If you have multiple sugars lined up in a certain arrangement, if you've got 2, you've got a disaccharide. If you've got more than 1, you've got poly, you've got many polysaccharides, just different forms of sugar that can be found in the body. Simple sugars are the energy source for our cells. So as evident from the product of photosynthesis, we use those sugars for metabolic reactions. Complex sugars like polysaccharides are used for energy storage in plants in the form of starches. And then in animals, glycogen is the energy storage in the form of the polysaccharides. And then so the main structure of plants is cellulose, which is also a polysaccharide, a complex sugar. So if you've ever eaten a vegetable, it's kind of tough, kind of rigid. That's the cellulose in the plant itself, all right? These guys are broken down by the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, maybe if you've heard that term before, and they're the most abundant biomolecule in plants. Plants are really made up of this tough cellulose, so that's really what plant is about. And then you've got 4 calories per gram is your energy ratio of carbohydrates. Next, we have our lipids, which are 5 to 10% of an organism. Lipids are made of a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. I don't know if you can see this image here, it might be blocking it, but you've got 2 types. You've got saturated fats and you've got unsaturated fats. Typical saturated fats include cream cheese, butter, coconut oil, all the fats that you really don't want to eat that's found in sweets and stuff like that. And they're solid at room temperature. What a saturated fat is, it means it has no double bonds in their fatty acid chains. So all carbon atoms are saturated with a hydrogen atom. That's what a saturated fat is. Compare that to an unsaturated fat, which is like some of the oils, like avocado oil, some oils that are found in fish, olive oil. Those are more of the typical good fats or good oils that you should have for your body. They are liquid at room temperature, and they have 1 or more double bonds in their fatty acid chain, and they have fewer hydrogen atoms associated with their carbons. So their carbons are not saturated with a bunch of hydrogen atoms like they are in the saturated fats. All right. Their importance in the biological function, they form the cell membrane around our cells in the form of a lipid bilayer. Again, neurons are insulated with lipids to help them fire and help them communicate. And then steroid, it's a type of hormone used in cell signaling. Those are lipids and fats as well. And you get about 9 calories per gram of energy out of lipids. This is sort of the lipid bilayer. Within these fatty acid chains, you've got a hydrophilic or hydrophobic head, which means they hate water. And you've got a hydrophilic tail, which means they love water. And they'll arrange in this sort of mechanism where you have the hydrophobic heads on the outside and the hydrophilic tails on the inside. And they're tightly packed like this, and this forms around our cell. The lipid bilayer is incredibly important because it helps regulate what diffuses in and out of the cell. Any ions, sodium, potassium, all has to pass through this lipid bilayer to make it in or out of the cell. So this is really sort of the bodyguard of the cell, and it helps regulate what exactly goes into our cell and what the cells need. So the lipid bilayer is incredibly important for a lot of biological functions because it works at the cellular level. All right. Any questions on any of those so far? I know I speak kind of fast, but all right, cool. Lastly, we have the nucleic acids. Again, this isn't really considered one of the nutrition molecules, but it is an important biomolecule because it's pretty much our DNA and our RNA. The unit is 1 nucleotide. So if you can see here, we have adenosine, thymine, guanine. Those are nucleotides, and they make up, they form base pairs, and they make up our DNA. These are incredibly important in cell division, protein synthesis, and gene expression. Who we are within our DNA is really based on the nucleotides. And then you don't really get any in your food, but you can eat some foods that have some, but it's not, again, not one of the primary biomolecules that we need for survival here. But nucleic acids are incredibly important for our DNA and for our cell structures. Lastly, we've got pH. Most reactions in the body happen in water. So water is essential to biomolecule function. Water has different properties, one of which can be the pH level of the water. So pH stands for potential hydrogen. I'm sure we're all a little bit familiar, at least with the pH scale. So if you have a pH of 7, that means it's neutral. If you have anything with a lower pH than pure water, so 0 to 6, that is acidic, which means it has a lot more hydrogen ions. Anything that's a higher pH, 7 to 14 or 8 to 14, that's going to be basic. You have fewer hydrogen ions and you have more of this OH group, this hydroxyl group on here. All right. pH is incredibly important within the body because, you know, like I said, a lot of reactions happen in water. And so regulating the pH and the pH balance can determine a lot of properties of the water. And can determine a lot of properties of what happens at the cellular level, as well as different organisms that live within that water. So with your ecospheres, it's important to test the pH, determine what can live there. Some animals can live in incredibly strongly acidic environments, but most organisms like to have around roughly neutral environment for them to live in. So in the graph 7 is neutral, 0 to 6 is acidic, with 0 being strongly acidic, and then 8 to 14 is basic, with 14 being strongly basic. That is the pH scale at which we determine how much ions or hydrogen ions are in the water itself. So that was it. That's all I got for you guys today. Pretty quick. If you have any questions, I'll be here to stick around afterwards. But for next week, the only thing that's due is 4 more iNaturalist observations, 4 new observations, again, due before we meet at 11 o'clock. Again, email me a screenshot of your iNaturalist observations. And then start thinking about your sourdough project. So next week, we're going to dive into that and what that really is. But you'll need a lot of different supplies for that, as listed on page 23. So make sure you're getting those supplies set up so it's not super last minute. And then we have a meeting as TAs on Friday, and I think there's going to be an updated schedule. So keep a lookout for my email when I send that out about what that entails. But I'm assuming there's going to be an updated schedule coming up for you guys. Any questions? If not, you guys are free to go. I got one chat here. What is needed in the documents of our ecosphere? I went through this last week. Page 17 through 19 is the document that you should be turning in to me. We reviewed last week's lecture if you're still confused on that. All right, you guys are good to go.
I have a question about the promo code for the lab manual. What is that for?